But I do want to talk more, just before we wrap up this session, about some of the positive things that we can do to start to implement this less is necessary message right now. So this is what, what I'm hearing from CEOs is that making this kind of broad approach known is not enough. So saying, like, we've talked about it, we're all worn out, we're going to do less, we agree, less is necessary. But doing more with less is ground into us, institutionally and individually. And it's not enough. Like, we want to deliver. Choosing not to deliver is really hard. So the thing I'm hearing from CEOs and people in equivalent positions is that it's taking one-on-one meetings with each member of staff, and oh my goodness, doesn't that sound like something every CEO wants to add to their to-do list right now? But it's the thing I'm hearing is the only thing that's getting through. One-on-one conversations and list making. This is what's non-negotiable. This is actually, this is not going to be a problem for our funders or partners if we postpone it till next year. This thing's not going to be a problem if we don't do it all. And this thing sounds really exciting, but we're not going to say yes right now. They're really uncomfortable conversations to have, and they take time and energy, again, at a time when we don't have much time and energy. So what can boards do? Controversially, asking their CEOs what they need from them and then giving it to them. It sounds like common sense, but apparently it's not. So according to my survey, 58% of arts boards had no understanding of what their organisation actually needed from them at that point in time. So not a fait accompli. Reduce expectations of staff. So that, at a very simple, practical level that everybody could do this afternoon on their way home in the car, is reduce the number of what are usually too frequent board meetings and reduce the amount of reporting that needs to happen to prepare for those meetings, but also having that discussion at board level about the difference between what's non-negotiable and what's optional right now, what's need to have versus not nice to have. One of the things I'm seeing, and how you could, and then having the conversation about if you could achieve those non-negotiables in different ways. Reducing expectations of staff is also about something I'm seeing happening a lot at the moment, is that boards are listening to their CEOs when their CEOs are saying, hey, the entire team is at breaking point or past breaking point. We need to do something. We need to do something immediately, and no one's really got the energy to actually work out what that is. And boards are going, great, we hear you, we acknowledge that the team needs to do less. Can you work out, can you go away and solve it and then let us know and we'll agree? And for CEOs who are just getting that extra workload when they have come, it's still, for many people, coming and acknowledging to their board that they're struggling is a hugely vulnerable position to put themselves in. And then to say that in the same breath as I've got too much work on and I need your help, and then they give you more work in order to reduce your work. It's happening a lot, and so on down the hierarchy. Rejecting the normalisation of too much work for too little pay. So certainly, and I've reinforced this already several times today by saying we don't get into this for the money, but I know many of us have that conversation every year at budget time that we'd like, and having it even more so right now with the increasing cost of living, and our CPI salary increases are something all of a sudden something we can't even dream about affording for many of our organisations. Every time the Theatre Network Australia does an annual or biannual salary survey that not only shows the discrepancies within our sector, but then between our sectors, and we know how low our comparable salaries are, especially when you compare us to other non-art sector roles who are dealing with this, exactly the same amount of public money responsibility. So if you haven't already, though some boards still find this incredibly controversial, giving teams the new year period off without them having to use their leave is a great, easy, very easy way to acknowledge and compensate for lower than average salaries. Though actually there's an even more interesting trend at the moment, and a much bolder trend of organisations who are saying, look, these CPI increases are barely just keeping up with the cost of living, let alone the step change increase we need to acknowledge the worth of the value of our work on a comparable level to other industries, and implementing 4-day working weeks for the same amount of pay. Wouldn't it be exciting as all of a sudden the Australian Arts and Cultural Institutions of Australia just didn't work on the Monday? Still operating within the systems that we are stuck within, but we're so used to, you know, having the conversation about what our boards should be doing, that when we take a step back from that and ask instead, what do we need and what's the best way to source that need, and giving us the space for that not to be a board. There is obviously a part of that conversation with what do we need? We need the compliance required by the legislation, and at the moment that has to be met by a board, but it could be met by a very different looking board. And then the rest of the organisation, fundraising, for example, we know it's the thing that their boards are least likely to be interested in, and yet the expectations of boards are so strong in that area, which means that they're failing. But that's only because we're expecting that of them. So can we ask again instead the question, what do we need? Support with financial sustainability. What's the best way to service that need? Probably not a board. How can we address it in other ways? And I think if nothing else, there is, again, power and freedom in that reminder, in going back to our boards and saying, you know, we've done it this way, but most of the reason we've done that way is because our rules tell us that we have to do it that way, and those rules can be rewritten. A lot of people are rewriting their constitutions at the moment anyway. A lot of people organisations that incorporated as incorporated associations, which come with it all of the complications of being membership organisations, even when you're not really a membership organisation, and all of the risk associated with that, are reincorporating as companies limited by guarantee, because unlike the old days when it was overseen by ASIC and was really difficult and expensive to comply with, it's now all streamlined through the ACNC. So that process is happening a lot in this new competitive funding space. People are rethinking their constitutional rules in order to clarify their purpose and their place in this changing sector. And if we're having those conversations anyway about reinventing our constitutions, perhaps we could be having a bigger conversation that reimagines what those boards are, because those bylaws that we've put in for ourselves can be rewritten. Another one of the quirks of our model is that, especially in the small to medium sector, our boards are often bigger than our staff teams, which just adds a whole nother level to that balance or imbalance of power. You know, when you combine that with the fact that we're often recruiting for skills that we don't necessarily need to get in the same way, wouldn't it be interesting to think about what you need from those board members, which might be specific mentoring, which might be specific skills, in which case could we have one board member per staff member or one board member per staff team? You know, could we think about what this board structure looks like in a completely different way?